on my end anyway. Hello.
Hello, everybody. Hi. This is Dr. Radley Griffin from Tampa, Florida, with Griffin Concierge Medical and Dr. Mihaela Telecan of healingwithfoods.org from Melbourne Beach, Florida. Thanks for joining me today.
Cocoa Beach, actually.
Oh, I did. You're changed. I didn't know that.
Right. Well, I was in Melbourne, like in more inland, and now we are in Cocoa Beach. There are several small beaches next to each other. There
Isn't
is a
that
Melbourne beach, but
isn't
this
that
is
where Ron John Surf Shop is?
yes, and the famous Kelly Slater, I think is
Oh,
his name,
yeah.
the famous
Surfer, yeah.
champion surfer. Right. He's right here, like a few blocks down. He has a surfing shop and has a statue, and it's pretty cool. It's like a cool little place to be, like a surfing.
I love that. That's great.
Yes.
Well, here we are. We have our weekly low carb chats. I think that's going to show up there. There we go. Low carb chats. And today we wanted to kind of come back again and talk a little bit more about, in the beginning, we kind of gave the lectures on the macronutrients, carbs, fat, and protein. And again, we want to really, I think, reinforce what we're talking about. So we want to talk about must-add fat. And I think there's so many people out there who still have not made peace with fat, and so we really want to come full circle here. And yes, we want to be low carbohydrate, of course. I think that's the hallmark of our philosophy. But then we really want to talk about why fat. Why is this macronutrient so important? And I think we want to cover some ground here today too. We know from a carb restriction perspective, if we're wanting to get into the ketogenic state, a net 20 grams, maximum per day is typical recommendation from us. For, I think, general low carb, 50, 75 grams per day net carb is really recommended. And I think a lot of patients, and even myself, we don't have a great handle on how much fat we should actually be adding. Should we calculate that? We're going to talk about that a little bit later as well. But first, I really wanted to talk about and reinforce, again, these benefits of fat. What is it doing for us? And we want to kind of talk about each of those points, if that's okay with you, Mihaela.
Sure, absolutely. And in fact, we talked about this, but it's worth repeating it, because here around fat have any indoctrination when it comes to protein or carbohydrates. Some people know that if you eat too much protein, is this belief that it affects your kidneys and it can be bad, but it's hard for most people to get to that level of protein unless they have a kidney problem, right? And about carbohydrates, you hardly ever hear anybody saying that having too much carbohydrates can be dangerous for you, unless you have diabetes, right?
Right.
But then when it comes to fat, for the last 50 years, we've been taught that fat causes heart disease.
Right.
Everybody alive today that's at least 20 years old, I don't know if I'm doing math right, but yeah, probably 20 and up, has some degree of fat fear.
Sure.
Or fat phobia. And I see this with all my clients, especially if they are in their mid 40s, 50s, and they've been living like from the day they were born. That's all they heard. Stay away from fat and saturated fat, and have margarine and have vegetable oils because those are better for you.
No.
They really, really have a hard time eating fat. Like, they reduce the carbs. They do okay, slightly more protein than perhaps they need, but they are afraid to add fats, and that hinders their progress, their ability to actually stay on this low carbohydrate eating plan. Because not having enough fat, chances are you go hungry.
Yeah.
And you will have either too much protein or you don't go low enough on carbs. So So you have a hard time allowing your metabolism to switch fuel, to go from burning carbohydrates to burning fat.
Right.
Because even when you have too much protein, that can be converted into sugar.
Sure it can. Yeah.
In fact, half of the amount of protein, almost half, it has the potential to turn into sugar. And that happens usually when it's more than the body needs.
Right.
The excess protein, the body will be like, what am I going to do with it? Some of it gets excreted. In fact, no, in protein metabolism, what is not used by the muscle, it will be converted into glucose by the liver. So we can't say enough how important it is to go over the fat fear and to embrace fat. And of course, to make the distinction between what's the fats you want to embrace and what's the fats you don't want to embrace. And here we should say that fats that were eaten traditionally for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years before we had any industrial way of extracting fats are the fats that we can embrace wholeheartedly. And what are those? Are the fats that come naturally with animal products, right?
Right.
And some fats that are easily extracted from plants such as olives. Olive is a fruit, right? Or seeds, even sunflower seed, although it's high in omega-6, it's pretty easy to press that seed,
yes,
especially if you grind it and to extract oil from it. It's very difficult to extract oil from corn or from soy or from canola, which again, it's a plant that's man-made. So you have, when one adds fats to their diet, they have to always ask themselves, is this a old traditional natural fat that human body was exposed to it over the centuries? Or this is a more modern fat that arrived into our plate 50 years, 100 years ago? Because if it's a newer fat that requires highly technological equipment to extract, chances are it's not a good fat for you.
Yeah, I think that's obviously that's a simple way. It's that's why a lot of practitioners of low carb, high fat, or even low carb, it's really, I think, extract a lot of common sense when they apply a lot of common sense to their food choices. And I think if we have some, I think, general protocols such as, hey, is this what we've been eating as humans before the Industrial Revolution? I think that's a good tip for people as a general rule, especially when they're cooking in their own home. I know we have less control when we go out to eat. If we're having, chicken wings, for instance, those are probably deep fried in a vegetable oil. I seriously doubt they're using coconut oil to deep fry their chicken wings. So a lot of the times we don't have a choice. Well, they should be, but they're not. Absolutely. But yeah, very important. And so, earlier this year, or I guess we're in 18, earlier in 17, we're seeing the data trickle out now that is really, I think it's liberating the saturated fat theory and really tying this heart disease, these metabolic diseases, really more so as we believe to the carbohydrate sugar loading of people. And the saturated fats are kind of coming out of the dust and they're not being implicated as they once thought. And so I think, we tell people to trust us, but I have the benefit in my own practice of monitoring disease, monitoring these metabolic changes with our blood work. We can see it's not just a thought, it's not just a belief. This is happening. We see the changes happening. We see the plaque being reversed with our heart scans that we're repeating. We're seeing the diabetes go away. We're seeing the medication go away. So we're not seeing that the disease of fat loading. We're seeing the disease happening from carb loading, sugar loading, and creating insulin resistance, and we're reversing that. But for that person out there, again, who doesn't, how are they to change their mind? Is it, what's some advice for them? I mean, what would you advise?
I have to say, first of all, it's one news comes and tells you saturated fat is okay, it's true, inflammation and insulin are at the root cause of chronic disease. Then a month later, another expert comes and says, no, saturated fat raises LDL, and coconut oil and butter are actually not good for you. So people are so conflicted and so confused that I really feel sorry.
Yeah.
For the average person out there that's trying to figure out what to do so they get out of a state of disease.
Yeah.
So my recommendation is, my recommendation or encouragement is, what have you been doing up to this time? What have you been eating up to this time? And are you where you want to be with your health and weight and energy and productivity and brain thinking capacities and all that? If you answer yes, that means you're doing the right thing. If you struggle with weight, if you struggle with lack of energy, if you all the rest of the things that most people do struggle with,
sure,
you've been avoiding fat all your life, perhaps you can try something different to see if you get different results.
Sure.
So, and then again, always go back to ancestral living and eating. How did our ancestors, what did they eat? How often? How did the food look like? And I'm not talking about traditional eating goes like 300 years back. I'm talking ancestral eating that goes 200,000 years back. That's how far I want to invite people to go and question, because we hear this so often, oh, it's dangerous to eat such low carbohydrate or so much fat. Why is it dangerous? How was it when people did not have food industry, did not have packaged carbohydrates, did not have packaged bottles, vegetable oils? What did they eat? Was it dangerous? We would not be here today in the form we are. In fact, if we'd have eaten the same way, we would not see 75 to 80% of the population being overweight and obese.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think the negative for those who I think look at ancestral eating and they look back to those populations, they often cite, well, the populations of old did not live much beyond the age of 30, 40, and 50, and so we can't apply the same principles. And so our counter to that is, well, true enough, there was the infectious diseases were the basic, and accidents, infectious disease was basic, and pestilence was the eradication or the early demise. But there are many reports, especially in ancient Rome, of many centenarians, octogenarians, people living 80s, 90s, and 100 who were able to escape or weren't victim to the pestilence.
Right.
So there is that confounder as well, I think.
But we also have to think of their environment compared to ours. They live in harsh conditions. They had no roof over their heads. I mean, a hurricane came, you lived to be 30 years old because what were you to do when they swapped everything, right? It's like they had no protection. So in terms of environment, also had a huge impact. And even that, like the stress level, we're living comfortable lives, air conditioned rooms and heated rooms if it's cold and so on. So although we have chronic low grade stress of different nature, they had lots of acute stress, which also ages the body in a different way. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying we have to go live or eat exactly what they did, but I think we can learn something.
Yeah, I agree.
That helps us break a paradigm that's not serving us.
Right.
Because if it's really, truly biologically, metabolically bad for us to eat low carb and more fat, then it must have been for our ancestors too. Yet they were able to survive, to gather their food in the absence of food.
Well, absolutely. And that's why we see cases such as diabetes, for instance, were virtually non-existent really, but in the really emerged in the 1800s in our medical literature, 1900s, early 1900s in the medical literature, and really developing, the diagnosis, such as tasting the urine, for instance, for the sweetness of sugar. This was a new phenomenon, as was indicated. This was not something that our physicians of old were very familiar with, and they were really having to look back on the scrolls, if you will, to find cases of this. So I think that's very telling as well of this is a modern phenomenon, and this is not an ancestral phenomenon. So I think that's very important for us to recognize. So I think, we've established that, hey, we are firm believers. And do you think we should talk a little bit about really these benefits? What are we expecting from our why fat? Why do we want it in our life? Is it just to increase the calorie deficit that the lack of carbs have left? And I wanted to make a few points here, talking about 6 real benefits of fat eating. And I think the first and foremost is energy and fuel. And we've talked before about, just to recap, how the body fuels itself either on carbohydrate fueling, glucose fueling, or fat fueling. And what's so interesting about when we're fueling ourselves from fats, we're fueling ourselves with fatty acids, which fuel each cell. And then we're fueling ourselves from the breakdown of fat, which it comes in the form of ketones. And ketones are these small lipid-derived molecules that are made in the liver. And they basically fuel the body. And what's so interesting about this, we have an abundance of fat stores on our frame. And it's such once we're able to tap into this reservoir, it virtually serves as a continuous fuel source. So people feel as if there's no ups and downs, ebb and flow to their energy. They just feel very equal and throughout the day. And in fact, they might even feel a little bit of an energy burst. And I think that's what a lot of our clients and patients are experiencing. Mihaela, you see that all the time.
Absolutely. Well, I feel it. First of all, I live it.
Yeah.
Yes, energy, absolutely. The minute we lower the carbohydrate intake enough to get into that nutritional ketosis zone, and less than 50 grams for most people help them get in there, and we supply enough fat, the body starts to use fat as fuel, just like you said, and the energy stabilizes. And as we burn fat into ketones, the appetite is also suppressed. And probably you have that as the next
I do, yes,
benefit, because that's the beauty of entering this nutritional ketosis zone, where you become a fat burner. You lose that obsession over food. You're just simply not so hungry. You may feel a little hunger pangs in your stomach, but if you drink water and you ride the wave, your energy doesn't drop.
Right.
You don't feel achy inside and jittery and angry and irritable. You just ride the hunger wave with a water or a coffee or
sure, something
like that, or you take 3 nuts or a handful of nuts, and you just can't go until dinner.
Right.
If that's what the situation asks for. And that's very similar to what our ancestors did, right? Sometimes they had food, they ate, sometimes they didn't. They were hungry. They rode the hunger wave, and they had enough energy to hunt or gather their next meal. It's very similar. In our modern environment, maybe we have to go from meeting to meeting, or to run with the kids from one place to the other, and we just don't have time to sit down.
Right.
But if we tap into this fat source of energy, whether it comes from outside or from our own body, we have the energy, and because of the ketones, this alternative fuel that goes primarily to the brain, we don't feel the hunger.
Right.
And the blood sugar may fluctuate within the normal limits that's normal for the person, and it's always maintained at safety.
Right.
And what's not supplied by glucose, it's supplied by ketones. Mm-hmm. So you feel good.
Absolutely, and the appetite suppression. It's so interesting. So there's a couple of theories of why high fat and even fat burning suppresses appetite. One theory is that when the fat cells are releasing their energy in the form of fatty acids, they also release leptin as well. Leptin is a hormone. It's a natural appetite suppressant. I think the term leptin is even derived from the word either Greek or Latin word thin. Mm-hmm. And so that is one theory, is that we're actually releasing and increasing leptin in our body. And some people are unable, they don't release leptin. They have, we'll say, a leptin deficiency, and they virtually have no appetite suppression whatsoever. And those people in particular, that's challenging. Others, it's perhaps theories are when the fat enters the stomach, there is a slowing of the digestion. The stomach acts as sort of a reservoir. It hits the pressure receptors in the stomach, which triggers satisfaction. That's another idea of how this actually suppresses appetite. I lean toward both, but the leptin is something we see in real life in practice. We see people who are fat adaptive. There are no energy deficits. There's none of these energy deficit triggers that would trigger an appetite or hunger, and therefore people feel very satisfied. So it's a very natural appetite suppressant that we see when people adopt a low carb, high fat diet. They sometimes say, "Gosh, I don't have an appetite. It's gone away, and I generally don't feel hungry." And
right.
so
the ketones themselves suppress appetite.
Absolutely. That's another mechanism. Right. The next thing we see for fat, why fat? It's imperative for vitamin and mineral absorption. And I check our vitamin minerals in our patients as a standard of our blood work, and I would say a large percentage of our patients, if not above 75%, are vitamin D deficient and are B12 deficient, folate deficient, and omega-3 deficient, which is interesting. And what's so interesting is when we apply a low carbohydrate, high fat diet to their regimen, and they shift from carb adaptive to fat adaptive, they begin to absorb these minerals and these vitamins, and their D levels go up and their omega levels go up. And they're not necessarily eating more salmon, and some of our patients are not supplementing with D, but we see this natural rise in their absorption. And the counter to that, when we have patients who are adopting a low-fat diet, this is well documented that there are nutritional deficiencies in a low-fat diet, even in the presence of an adequate iron, B12. If you just looked at the contents of the food, there should be plenty of, they're consuming plenty, but they're just not absorbing it. And we see this quite often because we need the fat to absorb these minerals and vitamins. And think about that too. So vitamin D is so important for bone health. Well, we see more osteoporosis. We see vitamin K for clotting disorders, and diseases of cardiovascular strokes are a result of inability to control our clotting mechanisms. A for eyesight, and then E obviously is a very important antioxidant. And so if we're not absorbing these vitamins, you can see how diseases can occur as a result of that malabsorption. So I think that's really important. The next thing we have is hormone production. And Mihaela, talk a little bit about that, about how eating fat actually helps to promote our hormone formation in the body.
Well, we have the steroid hormones, right? A class of hormones that are based on fats, on cholesterol. And vitamin D is one of them, right? It's a steroid-based hormone, although it's called vitamin. Then we have all the sex hormones, adrenal hormones. Those are all cholesterol or steroid-based hormones. So it's important not only to have enough fat, but to have cholesterol, although cholesterol is not essential because our body produces cholesterol and recycles cholesterol, and that tells us how important it is, because if you
I thought it was poison.
Right, it tells you it's important. So that's one other great reason saturated fats and cholesterol not to be feared, because it's a substrate. It's the raw material that the body uses to create all these vital hormones.
Right.
Plus, with the fats, aside from the hormones, we have to think of our nervous system.
Correct.
Maybe you have that next, maybe not, I'm not sure. But our nerves are covered in this, it's like an isolating material called myelin sheath, which is, I think, 40% by weight is cholesterol. Our brain is 60 or so percent by weight fat. So fats are pretty important.
Absolutely. Yeah, as part of this hormone production, obviously every cell in our body, nerve cells included, are surrounded by a fatty layer to protect us.
Cell membranes. So it's
cell membrane, absolutely.
We are fatty objects. Well, we're amino acids and fats, and we have carbohydrates in our cell, like glycoproteins. Glyco means glucose, and we have proteins, and we have lipoproteins. But mainly, if we think structurally, we are protein and fat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every cell membrane is made out of fat, saturated fats, mono, poly, cholesterol. All that is part of the cell membrane that gives cells shape and structure and ability to communicate with each other. So fat, in fact, fat is an essential nutrient, because there are two fats, the omega-3 and 6, that we have to consume.
Correct.
The body cannot manufacture. And we have essentiality when it comes to protein, but not to carbs. So again, trying to bust this myth that going low carb is dangerous. It's really not dangerous, because the body has the ability to produce its own carbs, its own glucose. So no, if anything is dangerous, to go low fat and low protein.
Right.
Low.
Yeah, agreed.
So from hormone to cell to nerve to everything, we need fats.
Let's talk about the healing properties of fat. Talk a little bit about that, because I know as part of the gut healing protocol, we talk about incorporation of fats into the diet. Speak a little bit about how this macronutrient it offers healing to the body.
So first of all, I think when we think about fats, we have to see them as healing, because number one, metabolically are healing, because they are neutral. They don't require any of the hormones of metabolism that are usually involved in storing, like insulin or glucagon. So they are neutral. And then when it comes to immune system also it requires fats. And the gut lining, when it comes to absorbing nutrients, fats are kind of neutral in terms of enzymes. They don't require so much enzymes to be broken down to single fatty acids, like amino acids need to, or protein needs to be broken down to single amino acids, or complex long carbs to single sugars. Fat is packed, it requires bile, so we need to have a good bile function, where the liver produces the bile and the gallbladder is able to express it with the milk to pack the fats to be carried and absorbed. But again, fats are I guess that's how I would explaining in terms of absorbing. They are less demanding from the body in terms of energy for absorbing and producing enzymes and all that. I don't know if this
no, that's perfect. And of course it goes back to the healing when cells are damaged. The obviously fats serving as those building blocks to bring the raw materials in for cellular regeneration and healing, of course. So they're just vital. Again, they are essential for a reason. Protein is essential for a reason. And I think it's important for us not to
right. And even the gut flora produces short chain fatty acids, which again, to show how important fat is, that feeds the colonocytes, the cells of the large intestine, as well as it gets absorbed into the system and serves as fuel for the heart muscle, for example. So any way we look at fats, from healing, from energy perspective, from structure, from function, they are just everywhere.
Yeah.
and important.
Number 6, our 6th point here on why fat is weight loss, and I think this kind of goes back and forth. Does eating more fat promote weight loss? If someone is adopting a very low carbohydrate diet and they've plateaued, can they expect to trigger more fat loss by eating more fat? And I know this sort of goes back and forth. On some say yes, some say no. What say you, Mihaela?
I think for most people in the beginning, when they go from carb burning to fat burning,
yes,
it really doesn't matter too much how much fat they eat. If they eat lots of fat but very low carb, they will lose weight.
Right.
But it may come a point where the weight can stabilize. And that's when it's important to see, okay, how much energy my body needs, because we know it's more than calories in versus calories out. But at one point it does matter, because if you consistently take in more energy than what you need, and that's coming in the form of fat, you may be burning fat for energy, so you'll feel good, you'll have all the benefits of doing that, but you may not necessarily burn more of your own body fat. And if that's one of the goals, to continue to lose weight, to drop another 10 or 5 pounds or kilograms, you may not. So that's when you want to do the ratios between the fats, carbs, and protein. So you supply enough energy with the majority, like a 70% coming of fat, but within your needs. Body's needs to continue to lose, to be in a deficit.
So are you promoting that is a nice segue to what is our daily gram of fat? Should we first establish what our baseline metabolic rate is, and then divide from there? How do you suggest we do that?
Right. So first of all, I would say when anybody starts on the low carb, make sure you eat at least more than 30 grams of fat a day.
Okay.
For most people, that probably sounds like, whoa, that's a lot of fat. Because you want to make sure, and with each meal, have fat with each meal, because you want to make sure you stimulate your gallbladder to release bile, because otherwise stones get formed in the bladder. On a low fat, low carb with rapid weight loss, more cholesterol gets stuck in, because for that recycling cycle of the cholesterol has to be eliminated with the bile salts in order for you to prevent gallbladder stone formation. So more than 30 grams a day, and with each meal have fat, so you stimulate at least 3 times a day gallbladder release. Then when it comes to calculating your unique needs of fat, it's good to know your basic metabolic rate or basal energy expenditure. And then from there, you can add activity factor, and that gives you total energy needs. Am I clear here?
Oh, absolutely. So where can one go to calculate there's
a formula. I have a formula. Is Mifflin equation is the one I personally use. There are several formulas. Herrick Benedict. We learn all this in dietetics school. The most accurate is Mifflin equation. Chronometer is the software I use with my clients to log, and I can see their food intake, and that's where we set their intake, and they use Mifflin equation. That's one reason I like Chronometer.
Okay.
So that gives you like your resting energy expenditure, meaning what your body requires in terms of energy to maintain itself without doing any activity, if you were to sleep all day long. And then to that, you can add activity factors based on how active your lifestyle is. And then if you want to support weight loss, the theory is that you need 3,500 calories to build or to lose a pound of weight. So if one wants to lose, let's say 1 pound a week, you would divide 3,500 by 7, and you would need to be in about 500 calorie deficit per day to accomplish that goal. So when we calculate the macros using energy, that's how we do. Let's say your resting energy or mine, because your will be more like probably 1800 or 6. Do you know your resting energy?
Yeah, it's right around 2000.
2000. So 2000, and then you need another 1000 for your energy, so it's 3000. You want to lose a pound a week, you will need 2500 calories of food per day. And then you can do percentages of that. So you say, I'm going to take 70% of my energy from fat, and you calculate what that translates into grams, right? So it would be 2500 times 70. Okay. That's 1700 calories coming of fat. And we divide that by 9 because that's how many. So it's 194 grams of fat per day. Okay. And now if you eat 3 meals a day, you would have per meal 65 grams of fat.
Okay.
If you were to eat 3 meals a day. So that's how you calculate grams of fat. And then the remaining, you would say, okay, I want 5% of my 2,500 calories to be carbs. And then what's left is going to be protein. So if we do 5 times, what did we say, 2,500, would be 125 calories. So we divide that by 4, and that gives you 31 grams of protein, which will be very low for you, by the way.
Or 31 grams of carb?
Carbs or protein, because they are equal energetically. If you were to wait a second, no, 5. Sorry, we had 30. Or no, that would be carbs, 31 grams of carbs, and then we have left 15, right, for protein, because we had 30 plus 5 is 35, right?
Yes.
So that leaves us.
We said 70. Yeah, we said 70% of the calories are fat.
That's 25 for protein then.
25 for protein, yes.
So then we'd do 25 times 2500 divide. 625 divided by 4. 156 grams of protein. That's a lot.
That's
in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a lot.
We would have to
eat more fat.
So that's how you calculate. And then what you do in real life, like how I do, we say, okay, let's try this week this amount of protein, this amount of fat, this amount of carbs, and see how you feel.
Well, that's true.
If you look in your plate and it's like, there's no way I can eat this much meat, you don't eat.
No, that's right.
So you have numbers, but then you follow your body. Listen to your body. Your body knows what it needs.
Absolutely. I like the idea of using these new apps that are out there to help us track these macronutrients. And I think we can very easily track it for a few days to a week, put in what we think, I think if we have some guidelines of, okay, let me stay low with my carbohydrates, whatever's reasonable for someone. It might be less than 20. It might be around 50 grams or even 75 grams per day. And then we can work around, do we need to increase our fat content? And then we can work on the little details of, okay, where can I get more fat in my diet? Do I need to, I'm having tomatoes and cucumbers. I need to add some olive oil to that, or some ranch dressing or avocado to that. Mayonnaise, exactly.
Or made with olive oil or avocado oil, so it's not.
I think once people get an idea of where they're going, with their traditional low carb meals that we have, those of us who have been on this diet a while, we know pretty much what we're eating, and I think we can plug this into our app and get an idea, are we where we need to be? And if not, we can make the necessary tweaks. I think that's not everyone doesn't need to memorize that a gram of fat equals 9 calories, a gram of protein 4 calories, a gram of carb is also 4 calories.
For that, they can use my book.
Absolutely, all this is in the book.
They just open, and actually, I think I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure I did the calculation. How you calculate your protein needs, how you calculate your macros based on percentages or based on grams. You start from grams or you start from percentages. And again, based on your, like, if you all of a sudden lift more weights, you may for a while afford or want to eat 150 grams of protein a day, right?
Yeah, that's hard to do for a lot of people anyway. So I generally am not giving the advice of telling people to watch out on the amount of protein, because unless they're training, unless they're very, I would say, more well versed on protein loading and sources of protein, it's really challenging to get that. Gosh, I can't imagine. It's not very easy for me to get in 150 grams of protein a day. If I ever have, it's been probably by accident. So
ounces of protein, I will eat that in a whole week. But
exactly.
of course, I'm a woman, I'm smaller. But yeah, it can get complicated, but for most people it doesn't have to be complicated unless we really manage blood sugar with ketogenic diet. We talk about epilepsy or cancer or some neurological disorders. Most people don't have to go through lots of testing, lots of counting. Once you learn the principles, you find where you feel good and you just flow with it. It's normal, it's natural. It doesn't have to be anything stressful about it.
No, absolutely.
It tells you.
I think you can track it for a very short period of time, get the data, make a few tweaks, and of course, again, use people out there, use us for resources. We're here for you. We'll help you calculate. We'll help you come with meal ideas. Again, this is the community aspect of living this way. So we're definitely here to help everyone. So please post questions in the comment section of this chat, and we're here to help.
Yes.
Which is great. Well, this has been really great today. I think it's nice to have that refresher, especially with the U.S. News and World Report calling our beloved ketogenic diet, rating it dead last. Of course, I'm not quite sure what Eco Atkins is. That had a very poor rating as well. Not quite sure what that means. So we really wanted to reinforce the importance of fat, why it's absolutely essential in our diets, and all the true benefits. And let's get away from the fear of fat and embrace the healing aspects of it. So thank you. This has been great.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see everybody next week.
Yes.
Bye. All right. I think we're